Hello, everyone. Welcome to our series of podcasts called Reach Minds, Things to Ponder On in Our Life's Journey. In this first podcast, we will be exploring endings. How do we manage and navigate endings in our lives through some questions and answers format, which hopefully will offer you some insight. Before we start our conversation, I'm Nita Sharma. I'm an executive and leadership coach who is curious about people. And this podcast came about the changes and the transitions that I have been going through. And therefore, this got me thinking and being curious in terms of how do other people experience and manage change and endings in their lives? And how come for one person, an ending can be a complete standstill, yet for another person, this may lead things taken in their stride. Joining me today is my very good colleague, Joseph.
I'm Joseph Ogbonna. I'm a leadership and executive coach who treasures wisdom. And I look forward to exploring what wisdom we can find around ending.
Good question, Joseph. Now, endings can be about promotions, change in a job, starting a family, changes in our relationships, moving countries, changes in our health and lifestyles, changes that happen in our work and finances, death, and even retiring. So in essence, what we're going to be talking about today is ending as a change, which is so often situational, and also the process of transition that we all go through, which is the psychological part of our own adapting to the changes that are taking place in our lives.
Nita, one of the examples you gave as an ending, starting a family. I'm curious, how was starting a family an ending for you?
That's a really good question, Joseph. I think for me, starting a family, or at least for my part, and I guess with others, we're thrown into a process of transition, which is what I said earlier, is a psychological turmoil in some ways. It is also a situational change, but it also is a process where we somehow begin to change who we are. Now, this could be from being a single person or a couple to becoming a parent. That the life we had before having a family becomes different. So there is this whole psychological aspect that takes place. And we then begin to look for markers as to how much life is changing. Having a family requires us to adjust, adapt, relearn, learn, and maybe even think about the fact that I want to create a family which is not like my old family. Now, when I became a parent, I didn't think about what am I leaving behind. It's only during the course of the few months that followed, I had to recognize that my life was changing and that life would be quite different. The thing I wanted to say here is that when we're talking about endings, there is a planned and there's an unplanned, and there's an external and an internal aspects of ending that occurs. What I would say, there are losses and then there are gains. However, psychologically, I don't think we sit there thinking about endings in a conscious way.
That's so very true. I didn't come to terms with the fact that my sleep was never going to be the same again. So I carried on as if there was no baby in the house when we started our family. And many times, yes, we just go into change without coming to terms with what we are actually going through. And that then causes us sometimes to hunker back to the life we wish we had rather than the reality of the life that is in front of us that we're living. And then that causes us problems. We may have outgrown something, but we still want it because it is the comfort zone.
Great. And how did you, Joseph, I'm interested in the sleep deprivation. How did you manage that aspect of your sort of being in parenthood?
Well, Nita, this is a bit shameful to say, but I had to be told off many times because rather than become a light sleeper, I became a deep sleeper. Thus, I had to be ejected out of. And that's
Oh.
true.
Oh, wow. Okay. That's a great admission on your part. If I'm, very courageous to do that. It's just so kind of building on that, the endings of our sort of being single to becoming, parenthood, but wider than that. What does ending mean to you, Joseph?
So for me, endings are the conclusion of something. And sometimes that conclusion is a project or it's something that's not working well and has no future. Now, I have a tendency to have hope. And so I often find it difficult to give up. So when something has ended because it's not going anywhere, I often then want to resurrect it because in my mind, I've thought of different ways I could do the same thing. So an example, my company now has had many iterations in terms of what it does, but the company is still the same, but what it does has changed over time since it was started.
It's quite interesting because one of my favorite authors in this field around ending is the work of William Bridges on transitions. I love his work, and he, in his books, talks about ending not being a linear process, that it might have different endings to new beginning to a neutral zone, which is the messy part of ending sometimes. And I guess what you were talking about in terms of your company was there was sort of there was the ending, but there was the not knowing and then new beginning. And so there were multiple levels of endings and beginnings you were having. What do you say to that, Joseph?
I'm sure, Nita, what you're saying is exactly true. The thing is, I didn't take account of them. And one of the things this is bringing up for me are about the value of acknowledging an ending, because if something ends, there is, like you said, that messy period, there's a space. And often in that space, we can be still, choose what we fill that with, rather than just take the first opportunity that comes. If I accepted that, yes, that part of the business is ending, even if it's the same name, I can sit still and then say, okay, what next? I can then choose what goes in there. But what has tended to happen is that I will fill it with the opportunity that comes. Now, honestly, I can't complain with one of the ones I followed, which is about training to be a coach. But in that space, something new and even better can come up, when we allow the space to come up. Because as they say, nature doesn't allow a vacuum. We create a vacuum, something will fill it. Now, what will fill it? That's a choice.
Yeah, and what you remind me of is, again, the work of Bridges is that about understanding, the change can be about the situation. And what you're saying to me is that perhaps you didn't pay as much attention to the psychological aspects of it, which in itself can be a place of self-discovery, as well as acknowledging that loss, that sense of the reality that is going, and yet the new one has yet to emerge for us. And the messy part in all of this is that there isn't a structure there. And maybe for us, there's no scaffolding in there either, because we're unclear where the ending has finished, and we don't know what the beginning is, as you're describing. An example that I think also illustrates something quite pivotal about endings is, when we get promoted, do we as individuals recognize that who we were and what we did in our last role may not give us the acceleration in our new role? And in a way, we have to learn new ways of doing things, which can be distressing for us, because the old ways, as the way I look at it, has got us this far. However, what we need to reflect on is, how do I build new resilience, my new adaptability? What are the new behaviors and skills do I need to demonstrate in order for me to survive and thrive, I may say so, in the next role? And we may not be there yet. So in simple terms, as I'm sort of thinking about this, endings is not a linear process. And as you were saying, Joseph, we perhaps need to acknowledge it, embrace it. And I'm very aware that there are many corners in my life where I probably haven't paid attention to it at all. It's just gone over my head. I haven't acknowledged it. And yet, if I paid attention to the different shades, colors, and in respect to my feelings and emotions, or its impact across different aspects of my life, I wonder if that would have been a different experience for me. And Joseph, I wonder what's your reflection are on that?
Oh, definitely. I think what life experience has taught me is that there are many paths, and each time we take a different path, a different reality would result. So if you, anyone listening to this podcast were to take a pause and reflect, the insights they would get likely to change either their actions or who they are being in taking those actions. We are human beings, aren't we? And oftentimes we just keep doing and taking actions. But who are we being in ourselves as we take those actions? So I'm sure that something would change. What would change? I don't. But something would be different.
It's interesting because this is making me think about the different sort of neurological levels that we may encounter in ourselves. And what I mean by that is about our identities, about who am I whether I'm a parent or I'm moving country, who am I in this? What are my skills and behaviors do I need to show up? What do I need to let go of? And what do I need to take with me? What comes to my mind is a recent project that came to an ending for me. And that got me thinking about ending in itself. I'd worked on this project for about 3.5 years. And for me, it was a fantastic project. Many levels, I loved doing it. When it came to an end this year, I felt a sense of sadness, love, relief, gratitude, all those emotions coexisting. And there was a time where I felt there was a complete vacuum. And what had set in for me was a slight panic, because I wasn't sure what was going to be emerging next for me. And what I did differently, I held steady, which was a different way of me normally handling endings. So tell me, Joseph, what's been good about endings for you?
Well, I can't remember something about, there's a quote about staying still until the mud settles. You can see the bottom of the pond. That's
beautiful.
What came to mind when you said that. So good about endings. There are lots of things that are good about ending. Perhaps one would be the end of my being a bachelor and getting married. And the fact I had let go of my bachelor ways. I also moved countries after I got married. And that was, a bit of a wrench for me. Some of it I didn't realize until much later on in life, because I just went with it. I didn't think about it. I didn't consider an ending. And years later, I realized that some of my actions were based on the fact I hadn't psychologically taken stock of what was going on, accepted it in order to move on.
Well, Joseph, this has been a really insightful conversation, both hearing how you manage endings and just having an opportunity to air the subject of ending, which has been really fascinating for me. My big takeaway from our rich conversation, and hopefully for you and for others, is that whilst we can't escape endings, whether they're planned or unplanned, external or internal, what's important is to acknowledge that it's happening or it's happened, and to use your word that even in hindsight, we can take some essence out of it that we can bring into our own lives as we move forward from our ending. In our next podcast, we will talk about ending from the perspective of the internal, the grief reactions, the psychological aspects of ending. Thank you very much, Joseph, for partnering with me in this very first podcast, and my gratitude to you for being an ally and having the patience to help me navigate this very important area.
It's been a pleasure.